Hello guys, and welcome to this very first tutorial. In this video you will learn a lot of techniques to make beautiful high quality scenes on your own. I have made a sci-fi scene which will be the example for this tutorial. Quick disclaimer, this is not a step-by-step tutorial. However, if you follow along you will learn to make something similar to my scene and with the same quality. This video is 100% free to follow along. All the assets are in the description and free to download. If you haven't, you should definitely subscribe to my Instagram, Animatable. I frequently post inspirational content for you guys to watch. And with that said, let's get started guys. In this video I will be using fairly low poly assets from Sketchfab, which are completely free. However, if you do want better quality, you should get some better assets. Megascans and Polygon are some great websites where you can get some free assets as well as paid. Let's take a look at the scene we'll be creating in this tutorial. Let's start with the hover car I made. There is no need to start modeling the base of the car from scratch. There are already someone who has done a better job than you and published it for free. But be my guest. Hop on any website where you can download cars. I often use Sketchfab and this is also where I found this model. You can download it in the description. Select everything and press H to hide the model. Create a sphere. Tap into edit mode. Select a stripe in the middle and extrude it along normals. Press Shift Z to go into wireframe mode and delete the bottom half of the sphere. Select the edges that needs to be sharpened and press Shift E and drag with the mouse to determine the amount of sharpness. I drag it to the max. Select the bottom edge and extrude it. Sharpen it as well. Tap out of edit mode and shade smooth. Tap back into edit mode. Press Ctrl R to create edge loops. Press Alt H to unhide everything. Delete the wheels on the police car and replace them with the motor you just created. And there you go, you've created the hover car. Just kidding, but almost. Select all the engines and the car base as the last one. Press Ctrl P and parent as an object. You can now move everything by using the rig of the car. However, let's delete it for now and keep it simple. So with that done, press Shift A and create a path. Rotate it on the Z axis and scale it up a bit. So select the base of the car and go under Constraints. Add a Follow Path constraint. Make the target the path you just created. Check the boxes Fixed Position and Follow Curve. Under the item properties of the car, go under location and zero them out. This should snap the car to the path. Play with the factor property under the Constraint tab and it will move the car along the path. Now select the path and go into edit mode to edit the path so it gets a more interesting look. As our scene grows and we get more and more assets, we should remember to name everything. So the path is the car path, the car base should be called the car base, and so on. Press Shift A and create a plane and scale it up so it fits the path. Press Shift D to duplicate the car path and rename the new one camera path. Press Shift A and create a camera. Select the camera and go under Constraints. Add another Follow Path. Do the same as you did for the car, but this time with the camera. In my opinion, it's very powerful to have both the camera and the animated object snapped along a path, as this gives you a lot of creative freedom in the animation process afterwards. We'll get back to this. Once again, remember to check the boxes Fixed Position and Follow Curve. As the camera is snapped to a path, you will not be able to move it. Otherwise you will ruin the animation. So we want to wait for the camera to track a specific point. So press Shift A and create an empty. Rename it Track. Parent it to the car by pressing Ctrl P and parent it by Object. Select the camera and go under Constraints. Add a Track 2 constraint. Pick the track you just created as the target. As you can see, the camera should now snap to the track you created, so wherever it goes, the camera will follow. If you're wondering how I move the car, you simply select the car base, go under Constraints, and the Follow Path, you can just play with a factor. And you can also animate it by pressing I. And that is exactly what we're going to do for both the car and the camera path. So go to frame 1 on your timeline, go under the car base constraint and set the factor to 1. Press I to set a keyframe. Choose an end frame which will determine both the speed of your car and the length of your animation. I set my end keyframe to 150. Select all your keyframes and go down to the timeline and right click. Under interpolation mode, set it to linear so that it's constantly moving at the same speed. Now select the plane and tap into edit mode. Right click and subdivide it a few times just so we can give it a base sculpt. Head over to sculpt mode. By default you will have the draw brush selected. If you press the plane, it will drag it upwards, and if you hold Control and press again, it will do the opposite. Play around with the sculpt tools until you get an interesting landscape. As I know my camera placement, I know only half of the plane will be visible in the viewport, so I don't spend any time on the other part of the plane. Right now the camera movement is completely static, and we want this to change. So pick the empty, which we name track, and go to frame 1. Place a keyframe. Go to frame 150 and place another keyframe by pressing I on the keyboard and choose location, scale and rotation. Now you want to change the timeline into the graph editor. In the graph editor you can press normalize to make it more manageable. In the right corner where my mouse is placed, there's a little arrow. If you press that, it will open up the modifier panel. Choose the set location and add a noise modifier. Play around with the settings until you get a smooth camera motion that goes up and down. So let's give the ground plane a material. Go in and create a new material for the ground plane and import the surface PBR material, which I've linked in the description. Head into the material settings and change the displacement from bump to bump and displacement. Now it's time for a quite unusual technique. I find that Blender's adaptive subdivision is often buggy and crashy and doesn't really help at all. And when you're using displacement maps, you do want a lot of geometry. So how do you do this without getting tons of geometry that will totally get your computer to crash? Well, I have a solution. Select your ground plane and tap into edit mode. Go into your camera viewport. Select all the faces that are closest to the camera. Right click and subdivide them. Then add a subsurf modifier to your ground plane and set it to symbol. So why did we do this? Well, the geometry that is further away from the camera will also be less visible when we're rendering the final product, so it doesn't need as much geometry. And as you can see, the stones that are close to the camera look perfect, and those further away you don't even notice it. Oh, and remember to change the scale of the texture on your ground plane, otherwise it will not match and it looks stupid with big rocks. I set my scale to 20 and I think it looks great. However, it's not certain that this will work in your case. Now let's import some models. I have provided you with a link to this rock cliff model that is fairly low poly. The textures are also quite low res, which gives a fast render. By default, the roughness value and the specular value is set to 0.5. They should both be changed. The specular value should be something like 0.04 and the roughness value should be almost 1. The color contrast between the cliff and the ground plane is too big, so I add in a mix RGB node and use the eyedropper tool to pick a random color from the ground plane. This way I can change the tint of the cliff model to match the ground plane even more. Now duplicate the cliff model around the scene, place it different interesting places. Just be creative guys, this is up to you. When you're done, it's time to import the tree models, and these are very important. But first, a fun fact. Be careful when using alpha transparency on your leaf for your trees. Blender Guru did a video on this some time ago, and it will just increase your render time tremendously. I use trees without the alpha transparency, I deleted them just because it doesn't really matter for this scene. So place your trees around the scene in an interesting way. It is important to place a lot of them in front of the car as it will generate a feeling of speed. Then go under the render passes and pick mist pass. Now go to the view layer properties and check the checkbox mist. Now you can go into the world properties and change the mist pass settings. If an area is black, no mist will appear. If it's white, 100% mist will appear. Gray is a middle value and it will therefore be a mix. But wait a second, when we render it nothing happens? You thought it would be that easy? Idiot! Well, we have to change some settings. So I've taken the creative freedom to add a denoise node already. However, what we want to add is a color ramp node. And we also want to add a mix node. And then you can play around with the color ramp to change the amount of mist and where it is placed in your scene. You can also change the color of your mist, however I highly encourage you not to do that. Then you want to go into the world tab under color, and instead of color we want to use an environment texture. And then pick the HDR, which I have provided you in the description. And as you can see, it's only 1K, which makes it quite low res and it looks garbage, but it doesn't really matter because the mist will cover it up, so you won't even see the HDRI. And all we need is the reflections and the lighting. Let's get some texturing done for both the police car and the engines. Start by selecting the engine, go into edit mode and click U and Smart UV Project. This way we get it unwrapped pretty fast and easy. Go into the Blender kit, which you can enable under preferences and add-ons, and the Blender kit, which gives you free materials and assets. And I usually make my own materials, but for this tutorial it works fine. I added the rusty metal, which like nothing else in Blender fitted my engines perfectly. For the police car, I actually went into the engine material. I took everything except the material output, copied it, and pasted it onto the police car material. In the police car material, I had already added a mix node, which is just Shift A, search for mix node, and it's not the mix RGB, it's a mix node. And then you add the rusty metal material in the bottom socket, and as you can see, it splits because the factory is set to 0.5. It splits the police material 50-50 with the rusty metal material. However, we only want parts of the material to be rusty metal, so I added in a Musgrave texture, and I added in a texture coordinate node and a mapping node, changed some settings up. You can just copy what you see, and this gave me a great result with different patches of rusty metal on the police car. Well, that is it for me, guys, but I will be back, so fear not, because there are many more videos coming up in the future. If you found this video in any way helpful, please leave a like or a comment if you have any ideas on future tutorials or videos. But for now, let's enjoy the final result.